Welcome back. So this is Unit ICT PRG 414 Introduction to C# using Visual Studio. This is the theory session number 2. So what we'll be going through today is a quick review of session 1. We'll then talk about user input. We'll have a more in-depth view of operators, Boolean functions, mass, strings, and if statements. So in session 1, we looked at the requirements of our software for Visual Studio. We then had a brief introduction into the menus and how quickly and easily you can set up for coding and create your first Hello program. We then discussed how C# can be used and how this language can be a stepping stone to quite a few other projects. We then looked at the basic syntax used within C#, broke it down into methods, variables, data types, operators, and did some introduction programming. Now, that was a very brief intro into the mechanics of how things are going to work. So in that session we used the console read key to make the console stay open and wait for a keyboard entry before proceeding. This keeps the C# consoles from closing in the .NET framework. Now we want to expand on that and talk about console read line method. This allows us to collect a string, and if we need to, we can convert that input into other format. So we can convert it into a Boolean function, into an integer, whether it's a 32 or a 64, so normal integer or a long integer. So it's a inbuilt methods that allow us to do this, and it's the convert to function. We'll come back into these in more detail later on. Now, don't stress, we're not going to go through all of these operator types today. You just need to be made aware that there are lots of different types of operators, and we're going to have a look at the first two. So basically how to do mass. Okay, and we'll come back and touch the others if and where we need to get through what we need to do. So you've got your usual suspects: the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, modulus, which is basically returns the remainder of the equation. Then you've got increment and decrement, which just takes it up by 1 or down by 1. Now, the beauty about increment and decrement is by adjusting the way you type it in, it can be used as a postfix or a prefix to the value, so that when you use it, you can influence the way the values are going to be used in the next function. So postfix means the symbols are after the variable and prefix is before. So in this one, we're just going to use increment, but it works for both increment and decrement. So we'll start out with our variable I with a value of 3. So if we use it as a postfix, when we do it as a console write line, the output is 3 because the function of adding 1 is completed after the output. So when you come in to the next time you use the variable value, it's going to have that increment. Whereas if you use it as a prefix, as in this second example here, where we have it in front of the variable, we're adding 1 to the variable and that action is taking place before the value is actioned in this code line. Next up is our compound assignment operators. These are very varied, as you can see. Basically what they allow us to do is to shortcut some of the equations down. So instead of having to type out x equals x plus 3, you can just shortcut it in and use these combination operators. So here's x and we're saying plus and equals 3. So what that does is it does both functions for you. So it says, okay, I'm going to add 3 and then update the integer value for the variable x and so on down the line. So to give you an idea of how this works, the example here, we have the integer a equals 5 and a plus equals 9, and we're going to write that out and the output will be 14. So it's adding 9 to 15. A is now worth 14. So a minus equal 4, output is 10. And now a, which is 10, multiplication of 2 and update it equals, so a is now 20. So we can go through and use this short format to save a little bit of typing as we code. Now I don't expect people to remember these all off the heart. Just be aware that they're available and can be applied. It's always good to look things up and confirm the syntax. Okay, Boolean is a logical function. Now these can be varied. So when we remember, Boolean is going to return a true or false on the condition. So if we have the exclamation in front of the condition, we're basically looking for the reverse of the condition. Binary and then logical or and exclusive or. So we've got the and symbol. I can never remember that. Pipe. Caret. So these evaluate both operands. When we have the double, it's a conditional logic. So it's only going to evaluate the right hand operand and only if it's necessary. So these work very differently. Now, we all, I won't say know how to, if you've used keyboard calculators, you know the standard operators, plus, minus, multiplication, division, and how to put together an equation for a maths problem. Some of these are just some handy extras that may come up. So here, if you want to find the highest value between x and y, so you just do maths.max method. You've got a minim, a square root, and a rounding. So these will give you a quick way of calculating those values. So rounds up to the nearest whole number. Square root gives you the square root of x. Then you've got the minimum and maximum between two values. Like you can use if statements, which we'll look at a bit later, to work out minimum and maximum values as well. But using those maths figures for methods for those couple of values is by far a much quicker way of doing it. So in session 1, we talked about strings being a collection of characters within a double quote. We use these to store text for future use. So from last session, we introduced you to console write line. Hello, how are you? It was pretty much one of the first console lines that we put in. If we were using this text or preparing to use it in multiple uses, we'd put it in a string. So this becomes a variable hello, and then you just write line and the variable. This way you could use that string of text elsewhere within your program. So it enables us to repeat the usage multiple times without having to retype it every time. So some of the things you may want to know is the length, as in the number of characters used in any given string. Now, in this example here, we're going to calculate the length of our hello phrase, and it'll count the spaces, and if I remember correctly when I laid this out, it's about 18. Now, as you can see here, we have used the addition operator to stitch together bits of text and pop it out as a single line. Now, you can tongue's getting tied this evening. Concatenate. I'll give up. Stitch them together. All right. If you're wondering, it's very early in the morning and my tongue is no longer working. So the operator we can use to do that, but there's also other ways of stitching text values together. So what we're looking at here is a little scenario for you to go off and create. So create a program to introduce yourself. Use the variables fname and lname for your name, and then congregate them together, or stitch them together as your full name, and print it, so displayed in the console. Now, if you wish to go off and do that now, we shall use the magic of video recording, and you can pause it. Okay, so one of the ways you can do it is here. So using system namespace add strings, class of join strings, just using the main method there. So first name, last name, and then the string full name, and we put them together with a space between, and then we right line it out. Not a very complex one, but it gives you an idea of how to do it. Alternatively, you can use the string Concat. So that allows you to concatenate items together very neatly. So here you just use the string, put your variable name in, and then string concat, and then the two string elements that you want to I had it before, concatenate. See, if I concentrate, the tongue does work. Stitch them together. So here's the example using the same as last time. So our first and last names, and we've just changed the way we bring them together. No, I'm going to allow you to work out whether you want to hit the pause or not and go off and do it. Okay. We can do another method, which is Inter-Pollination, and this allows us to use a template type scenario where we can insert our variable values into placeholder positions. So if we're going to loop a function through and change the variable values each time it runs through, we don't want to rename a whole bunch of variables. We just want to make a template for the printing of it, so a console line command or something. And we can do this with the placeholders. So string name, you must use the $sign for the interpolation. And in this example, we've got the quotes, my name is, and then we've used the placeholders for first name, last name, and closed it off. At this point in time, I encourage you to go off, hit the pause button. Now that you've come back and had a play with these different methods of doing your introduction, we'll move on. Now, if you want to use actual quote, double quote, and backslashes within any of your strings, you'll come up with an error unless you use what's called an escape character in front of it, which is an extra backslash. So, string king, Henry V was King of England between 1413 and 1422. So just a bit over 9.5 years, if my memory served. And you'll notice here I've used the escape character to put the quotes, double quotes around the King of England. Some other special characters that you may want to use in your strings is for /n for a new line, /t to put a tab space in, and B for backspace. Now, when we were in the user input, where we were doing read line to gather a string, we talked about using the convert to methods. If we wanted to collect a number, for example, we would use convert to integer 32 to convert the string into an integer value, so we could use it in any equations we needed to. Another way of doing it is using the pass method, and the syntax for that is: here's your variable, and then you're passing to a specific type, so integer, whatever type of variable you want, the data types. Cast your mind back to session 1. Pass and the string you want to pass through. So in the example here, we've got text1, and we're doing the read line and getting a value in. Then a equals integer pass of text1. So we're converting that into a number. Now, if what was entered is not an integer, you'll get an error, and so there's other things to take into consideration when looking at this in detail. But we'll look at that, how we're going to handle the errors and that a bit later. Just get your head around some of the methods that we want to use while creating our code. If statements. Now, an if statement is one of several conditional statements that we can use. So these are used to evaluate the condition within the bracket, and we can use it by itself, use it with an else statement, or an else if. So these are going to execute code depending on whether or not the condition returned true or false. And the conditions that can be used if we're doing mathematics is less than, greater than, equal to, not equal to. So if the condition is true, then it's going to execute the code that is inside the braces. Now, you can use multiple if statements to function or cycle through things, but quite often it's paired with the else function. So if we're looking at a little flow chart of how it reads, you come in, you've got, and that graphic has a typo in it. I didn't notice that. If the condition is false, we'll use the false statement and then continue on. If its output is true, condition is true, uses a true statement and then goes on to the next. So what's that look like in code? So if condition, if it's true, it runs the first block of code. Else, it runs this block of code if it's false. Then moves on to the rest of the program. So to give you an example of an if else statement, so if A is greater than B, then we're going to write A is greater than B. Else B is greater than A. So why don't we write a little program to get used to using if statements? So go off, create the project if underscore statement underscore 1. Use class name of if underscore stat1. Use a equals 100 and b equals 20. Remember to always put comments in your code, in your programs, and then display the values, and then display which is bigger. Don't mind me, I'll just wait here while you do it. In other words, hit that pause button and go off and do it. Alright, so thank you for pausing and going off and doing that little activity. Here's an example of a possible solution for you. So, bit of commenting, integer a equals 100, integer b equals 20. Compare the numbers if a is greater than b. Oh look, that's what I had in the example on the last slide. Oh, shocking. Not rocket science, people. Alright, it's just getting used to thinking about how you're going to lay out your code to step through what you need to go through. So, to give you some after action activities, because I know you're so used to hearing my lovely voice that you just want to continue hearing it. But it's time for you to go off and write some programs. So the first one's find the smallest number out of 2 numbers, find the smallest number out of 3 numbers, and then find the biggest number out of 3 numbers. So there's multiple ways we can do this. I'll be interested to see what solutions you've come up with. Alright, so in summary, we looked at using the console read line to gather a string input. We looked at a few of the more in-depth operators to use with the compounds and variations there that allow us to do some shortcut keys while we program. We looked at the true false evaluations of Boolean. We then looked at about 4 methods that provide a nice easy solution for mathematical equations. We looked at how to manipulate strings so that we can massage what we need to do, and how we can use variables to populate outputs. And then we had a look at conditional statements using the if and else combinations to produce and execute different portions of code depending on meeting certain conditions. Okay, well, that's the theory for session 2. Hope you found it informative, and thank you for joining. And until next time, it's bye for now.